The main topic of this video is working with HTML in Python. Specifically, we'll introduce markup languages, what that means, and then we'll talk about some of the syntax of HTML, with the last goal being writing HTML with Python. You probably work with HTML every day since you use the web every day. You also, in a geographic context, have probably used other markup languages like KML. The image that's shown here is a KML data set. The lines on the picture are from a KML data set. When we get on further in this topic, we'll be going over how to read KML data sets with Python. First of all, why do you want to learn about HTML as a GIS analyst? Well, one big one is web mapping. Now, web mapping is going to use HTML, it's going to use cascading style sheets, CSS files, and it'll probably use JavaScript if you're going to make dynamic maps. Now, CSS and JavaScript are beyond the scope of this course, but having some knowledge of HTML when you start learning about CSS and JavaScript should help you along the way when you get into that. Also, if you're doing a MGIST, you'll need to make a portfolio for your work at the program, and that'll need to be HTML. So it's nice to know about tags and how you can control the look of your portfolio. You can also use Python to scrape data from the web if you know something about HTML. And you can use it, as I mentioned earlier, to parse or look through or sort out KML and XML files. Finally, you can also use Python to write or create web pages from scratch. So for many of you, this could be useful for your projects where you want to have not only a map as output, but have a nice report that could be created with your Python code dynamically when your data is output. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Now, markup language is differentiating it from a programming language. It doesn't have things like for loops or branching with conditional statements like if and else. HTML is not made for that kind of thing. It's really made for describing web pages. There are a number of other markup languages like XML and KML, and those will have their own set of tags that are associated with them. You may have seen if you ever open up the XML files that come with your data sets, you'll see that there are tags in there with those angle braces around them. And if you read carefully, you might understand that the XML files are talking about the origin of the data that you created. So one reason that your XML file is always going to be different from someone else's XML file that comes with a shapefile is if you have created those files at a different time. They'll have different timestamps, modification time. So, as we said, HTML is made up of tags, and those are, a tag is a keyword surrounded by angle brackets, for example, HTML. They usually come in pairs, with a beginning or a start tag and end tag, like P and /P. These are also referred to as opening and closing tags. Closing tags always contain this slash. There are a few tags that are standalone. We'll look at that in a minute. In other words, they don't necessarily have a pair, but most of the tags have a partner they go with. Some tags have attributes. In fact, most tags have a set of attributes, almost like attributes in Python that, almost like objects have attributes in Python that are associated with them. For example, here's a tag for an ordered list. An ordered list is a list that is a numbered list. And this tag is, this attribute allows you to set the start of the numbered list. So you don't always have to start with 1. Okay, so let's look a little closer at this example of an HTML page. Quite simple. The HTML page itself looks like this down here, and the code, the HTML code, looks just like this. So let's step through this. The first tag that you see is this exclamation point doc type HTML, and that tells it simply that it's a certain type of HTML. The current HTML is HTML5, and that's a set of specifications that, or standards for the HTML. It really doesn't matter much to us because we're doing simple programming with HTML. So HTML5, that's all we're using. So details don't matter. The text between angle bracelet exclamation point dash dash and dash dash angle brace bracket, those are comments. So if I want to put a comment in my HTML code, I'll put it in between these two tags. The text between HTML and /HTML, boom and boom, describes a web page. So we always put this doc type tag at the beginning and then follow it by a plain old HTML tag, and at the very end we put the /HTML. Anything that comes between the body start and end tags is going to be displayed. That's the visible content of the page. Now some web pages will have a header that may contain other information that controls the look of the page, but it won't, the header, the data between the header tag, header start and end tags will not be part of the visible content of the page. Now the next tag I have listed here, H1, means whatever is between those two tags is displayed as a heading. And H1 has a preset size, the size with bold, and this preset font. This is the default font. Those kinds of things can be controlled with style tags, but for now we're not going to get into that detail. The text between the P and /P is displayed as a paragraph, and you see that there's a space before and after that. So ask yourself, what does the B tag do? The B tag's wrapped around the word first, and if you look down here, yeah, you see a bold result. Okay, so B stands for bold. How about the BR tag? The BR tag up here inserts a carriage return. So that's, or a line break. I guess BR stands for break. Notice that the BR stands on its own. There's no partner for that. You just put the BR, and you can optionally put a space with a / after that, and that's a standalone tag. We don't have a partner for that. Now we're going to do some in-class exercise that will allow you to try out the tags, the HTML that we've been talking about. In this exercise, you'll go to the in-class web page, and it'll provide a link for you there to an HTML5 tutorial page, and go ahead and click on the Run button for the code that's currently in there, just to see that code, see what that code produces. And then replace the code in the left window with the code that is provided. There's a link to code, a text file with HTML code in it. So you'll just copy and paste that into the left window, and then click the Run button again to observe what happens. There are a series of questions there that ask you to modify the code and to affect some changes. So go ahead and pause your video now and go over to today's in-class page, click on that and try it out. After this, we will go on to another slide which will discuss the results of that exercise. Lessons that you picked up from the HTML, from just working with that simple HTML exercise. You learned how to resize an image. You can put the width and height tags in there with a specific value. Now be careful about resizing images in a way that doesn't preserve the aspect ratio. In other words, you change it so that you want to keep the proportion of width to height the same as the original one. And in fact, you really should be careful about resizing images when you're trying to make a really high quality document, because when they get squeezed down, some of the pixels have to be removed. If a very simplistic algorithm like an HTML page is doing that, this can result in a really fuzzy image that's perhaps not something that you want in a professional looking document. Then, how to add a row to a table. Well, you can simply copy an existing row and change the contents between the TD tags, right? The TR adds a new row, and each of the TD tags is specifying the cell data. Then, how to add and remove table borders. Well, you may have noticed that this has a border attribute. The table has a table border attribute, and you can either change that to 0 or just remove it entirely. There's a box around the last row. So the border attribute is used to modify the table borders. You can make them thicker by specifying a higher number than 1. How to make a numbered list that starts the numbering at 50. Well, you can use that attribute that we talked about earlier, the start attribute. How to make a bulleted list. Change the OL in ordered list to UL, which stands for unordered list. Makes a bulleted list. How to insert a line break. You can use the BR tag, so BR space / or just plain old BR will insert a line break. How to create a hyperlink. Use the A tag. The name of the tag is A, and the href is an attribute. So that's specifying the destination. Oops. That href is specifying the destination, the hyperlink reference, and this between the opening and closing tag is specifying the display text. So pause for a moment and think about how you might make a hyperlink tag that would link the words "go to Google" to the Google website. If you said you would change this to www.google.com and this to go to Google, then you are correct. Now let's go back and look a little more closely at the IMG tag, the tag we use for embedding images. That has two attributes that are required, the source and the alt attribute. The source specifies the name of the image. Alt specifies the alternate. If the image is not available, it'll be displayed as a little blob with text. Also for readers with vision impairment, this is the text that will be read aloud to them to explain what the image is. If they are reading your web page, they may have some device that reads it out to them, then wherever there's an image, the code that says Alt will be what is explaining to them what that image is about. And then of course we can use the width and height tags. Keep in mind that the image itself isn't actually inserted into the HTML page. The HTML page points to or links to images. So there will have to be a file somewhere, either local to your web page or somewhere out on the web, that is storing that image. In this example, we said src equals the name of the image only, the name of the image only. And that is because that's assuming that this image is local to where the web page is. So it can find smiley.gif because it's in the same directory as where the web page is being served. So it must reside where the HTML resides. Do you always have to have the image in the same directory as your HTML? No, but if you don't, you need to have a path that specifies it. So that might be a relative path to the HTML, or it might be a URL, which means somewhere out on the web it's being specified. So the example that you played with used a picture of kittens, and that is somewhere out on the web that image lives. When you make a website for your portfolio or your other courses, where can you store images on the web? Well, there are lots of image posting locations now, but where can you put your web page? Do you have to buy a URL? No, you don't. One option is to use GitHub space. Of course, GitHub's main purpose is for versioning code, but you can also use it to store small websites. Once you have your account, you need to create a project, and then create a web page, name it index.html, and that will be your home page. So if you want to experiment, you could use one of the simple web pages that we have as examples in the sample data materials for the course, and just rename it as index.html. Then upload that index.html to your repo, and you can use Git and learn how to do that. It may has a little bit of a learning curve, but it could be useful. Or if you just want to quickly test this, you can click on the upload file button to put it into your repo. Then click on settings, and this is how with settings you can create a web facing portion of your GitHub site. So under settings you'll find GitHub pages. Use the select source drop down menu to select your GitHub pages publishing source. This could be either master branch or GH pages, or some other subdirectory that you've created in your GitHub site. And so whatever you pick here should be the location of your index.html page within your GitHub site. When you click save, it will say something like your site is published at, and then it'll give you a URL. So that's the URL that you need to use to access your web page, not the GitHub site where you uploaded your index.html. That's a repo, and the site page is specified only on this page in the settings. You can always go back and look at it in the settings, but that's where you need to browse to preview your page. And that would be the link that you can share with others to share your web page. And if you want to host images so that you can reference them in your web page, say you take screen captures of your web pages from your projects, you can upload them into your GitHub repo and then point to them locally from your web pages using relative paths. Let's look a little bit more closely at lists. Lists are used to, so the OL and the UL are used to create lists of ordered or unordered lists in HTML. And the items, each of the items in the list must be surrounded by LI tags. So each individual item starts and ends with LI begin and end tag. A couple of useful types. We already talked about start. There's also attributes. There's also type, which allows you to change, so you can make a lettered list, or you can make a Roman numeral list. So just so you can look at these examples and how they were done. If you put an I, a big I here, you'd have a Roman numeral list. Notice how that's nested. You have the OL, and then you have list, item, list, item, list, item. Those are inside of there, and then the OL ends. There's a little bit more nesting in the tables because you have two dimensions. The list is one dimension, that you have items in a sequential items. But for a table, you have both columns and rows. In a table, you specify the table tag, and then you put your table row tags, and for any columns that you want to have inside of there, or any cells that you want to have inside of there, you have to specify either a TH, which stands for table header, or a TD tag. And you notice the difference with TH creates these bold header looking fonts. And the TD stands for table data. Those guys are nested inside, the TH or TD are nested inside of the TR, which is again nested inside of the tables. One thing I want to point out is that you can use tables for other things other than table. You can use them for layouts. And this silly example down here makes a lot of angry faces line up and make a little upside down U shape. And that's done with tables. There are 4 faces in the first row and 2 faces in the last row with some empty cells in between those 2 faces. Notice that there are no borders turned on, and that's how you make it just look like it's a layout without showing that you're using a table. Notice these are indented, and then these are all indented to the same level. Looks tidy. But this is not required for the web browser to read it correctly. Your HTML could look like this, for example. But can you guess what this page looks like? You might be able to see that it seems to have a picture in it, but a lot of the rest looks really confusing. If I instead use spacing and indentation to make this neater, then it's a lot easier to see that this is just a very short HTML with a body that has a header, a little bit of text, and an image. It's ideal to try to create HTML text that looks nice. And there are lots of editors that will help you do that when you're writing straight HTML. So you don't have to just use Notepad and struggle and indent things. It's similar to Python in that it'll help you indent. But unlike Python, the indentation is not required. Now, let's go on to an example. Suppose you want to write HTML with Python. You've processed some data in your script and you have some output results, and you want to create a web page that'll display a screenshot of the data and some information, maybe some captions about the data. You could use the ArcPy export to PNG to take a screenshot of your map, and then you could use something like we used the frowny face layout to lay out all of your images nicely on the page and maybe have the second row be captions, something like that. Remember, HTML is just text, so we can use standard file input-output operations to deal with it. We can read it with Python and we can write it with Python. So we're focusing on writing it with Python now. So it would just be using the open command with the write mode tag. We'll look at a couple of examples and then we'll do another in-class exercise. In this example, we are writing this page with Python. We can create the HTML string using triple quotes. Cast your mind back. Do you remember why triple quotes can be useful? If you said it's because they will preserve indentation, that's the reason that we're using them here. So it'll allow you to make a string on multiple lines and preserve the spacing of the string that you've created. We can create the HTML using a triple quote string, and then 2, we can open a file for writing using our standard built-in open function. Then we write the string that we've created, my string. We're just writing that to the file, and then finally we can close this file object with our close method. Of course, you could also use the with as approach. Then, once you're done, you can view the output that is created. You can go over and look at index.html in your browser. It should look something like this. That was a really simple file, as most of the examples that we'll have on these slides, because they'll fit on the slide. But if you want to build HTML that's any more complex, you might end up wanting to break it up into separate strings. In fact, this might be a place where you want to use built-in functions in your code, something that might create the header or create HTML for an image to be inserted or process a list HTML form. Look at this example where we've split up the HTML in the Python. We've created the body, the header, and the footer separately, and then we write these parts to the file in the order that they need to be written. So this is simply the same script as we saw on the previous page, but broken up with several variables. So the header, of course, has this exclamation doc type HTML, and it can have the HTML and body tag in our simple case. That's the very beginning of it, and then whatever's in the body can be placed in another variable. And the footer can simply have the end body and end HTML tags in it. How might you build an HTML list from Python? Well, you know it's got to have these outside tags, either UL or OL, and you know it has to have an LI around each item in the list. If you have a Python list, basically what you want to do to create an HTML list out of that is wrap an LI tag around each item and then wrap the list type tag around the entire. Line them up and then wrap that outside tag around them. This example shows a function that's defined to do exactly that. Here we have a Python list of data, and if we want to create a HTML list out of that, we can call this Python to HTML lists method. We pass in our Python list, and we pass in the type of list that we want. We want a UL in this case. So it takes these two inputs, and on line 13, it does a list comprehension to plop those LI and /LI tags around each of the items, each of the strings that were given. You don't have to worry about the U getting in there because that's just specifying the type. That won't be included. Then the next command is putting a carriage return, because we want these to come nice and tidy with one list item on each line. So it's putting a carriage return between each of those and putting some space before, so it'll be indented. And then the last part of this function takes the list type, which is what we passed in up here, and it inserts it as in tags and angle braces around the code that we've it's going to be placed around a list of items. So number 2 is our item string that we created, and so that'll contain all of these, and that'll be placed in between them. The 1 here is the attributes, so that's an optional argument that you can pass in if you want to say start your list with type A. You can pass that in and that will be specified as an attribute there. So we're going to do an exercise that uses this method. Well, you'll need to call this method, and that will be provided in the script. So one more look at that. We can use this in context. We can call, for example, we can get the rasters in a workspace, list them out, and put that list into our Python to HTML list method, and then create HTML that gives a bulleted list of those files. So now we're up to the second in-class exercise. You'll be provided a script that's linked to the page, and you're going to save that in C++ Scratch, and then run the script as is, and you'll see the output HTML page that it creates. It's not complete, and so there will be things in there marked with double hashtags that you'll have to change in order to create output that looks more like this. So the idea of this is you're going to take a real data set and you're going to find all of the values of one of the fields in there, and then you'll find the unique values of that field and create a bulleted list of those unique values, and you'll take a screenshot that is provided for you and link to that screenshot. So your output will have a header and a bulleted list and a screenshot. So the things that you have to modify in the code are creating the bulleted list of unique values for a given field, and there are 3 functions that are given in the code that will help with this, one of which we just went over. You'll insert an image in the page using an IMG tag that you'll write as a string in your Python code, and you'll remove the table border by modifying the existing HTML string, and you'll create a dynamic header using an h3 tag. So please pause your video and go over to the in-class exercise and try to make this HTML come out to look exactly like the image that is provided. Next, we'll go over the code that you would have changed when you complete. Solving this in-class exercise involved calling 3 user-defined functions that were defined in your script already when you started. The first one is the get field values for getting all of the values in a given field. So that would take the full path file name of a table and the field name of the field that you wanted to get the values for. The second method that you had to call would take that full list and convert it to a unique value list. Get unique list values method casts the given list to a set and then casts that set back to a list. When you do a casting to a set can have only unique values. There can't be any repetition in a set, so that does the uniqueness for you. So the list that is returned here is then passed into the third function call, the Python to HTML list. That's the method that we went over in detail earlier. So you get your HTML list, and that gets passed into the body of the HTML string. The next thing you had to do was create an image tag for the image that you wanted to insert. So that would have IMG src equals something, and here we're using string formatting to dynamically pass in that image name, And the script that was given to you had the relative path conveniently to the image already. But that would need to either be a relative path or a URL. You can never use C:/ in your image source. Okay, it can't be a full file path name as we've been using it in Python, because that is just not going to be interpreted correctly by a browser. It can't look at the C drive like that. Then you could set up the alt as map of the, and in this case it would be cover, so the filling in the file name in that second position. Now, to remove the table borders, you could have either set the existing attribute to 0 or just taken this attribute out entirely, so it would be table with angle braces around it. Finally, to set up the header, you needed to use the H3 string. That was what we specified, and that would give you the same size as what's shown in the image, and use string formatting so that it would dynamically populate the field name and the base, the name of the data that we're looking at. In this case, we use the variable base name, so we'd just get that part of the name. So today we looked at HTML syntax just in a very beginning way, but some of the key ones are the tags for images, the tags for linking, hyperlinking, which is the A, the tags for lists and tables. And one thing that we skimmed past was there is a spacing tag here, and you can use pre to retain pre-formatted spacing. There are pair tags or singular tags, and tags have names, the tag name like IMG, and attribute names like source, SRC, and attribute values like in our IMG examples, source could be set equal to smiley.jpg. And then the tags can have contents themselves, like you can set HTML tag with the text that goes in between the two tags is called the contents. We're going to use these terms tag names, attribute names, and attribute values and contents in an upcoming lesson. So it's good to be cognizant that those are terms that we're going to need to be familiar with. Then we went over how to write HTML with Python, just simply using file IO in the write mode and creating custom strings that would print out the HTML that we wanted. In the next lesson, we'll talk about parsing HTML and parsing other markup languages so that we can extract information from them. Parsing just means pull apart and look at the pieces. We'll use a package called Beautiful Soup. And there are, of course, other topics that we're not touching on with HTML. Just the tip of the iceberg is what we've hit today. And of course, there's lots of interesting things to do with CSS and JavaScript. I hope this lesson whet your appetite to learn more about how Python can interact with markup languages.